Hello everyone, welcome to our YouTube channel Logic Medico. Today's interesting topic is the middle ear cavity. The middle ear cavity is a cubical chamber. So this cubical chamber is present within the petrous part of temporal bone. So this is the petrous part of temporal bone. The middle ear cavity is present within the petrous part of temporal bone. It is also called as a tympanic cavity. So it is roughly cubical in shape. It has got 6 walls: the superior wall or the roof, the inferior wall or the floor, the medial wall, the lateral wall, anterior and posterior wall. So 6 walls are there. All the walls are bony except the lateral wall. Lateral wall, there will be a membrane. It's called the tympanic membrane. Except the lateral wall, remaining all the walls will be bony. So let's see what is the relationship in each of these walls. One by one we'll see this. So let's start with the lateral wall itself. So as already stated, lateral wall there will be a membrane. It's called the tympanic membrane. It has got 2 parts, pars tensa and pars flaccida. You can see the handle of malleus, you can see the cone of light, you can see the lateral process of the malleus. And these are the parts. This is the superior, inferior, anterior and posterior aspect of tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane is made up of 3 layers. That is the outer cuticular layer. It's like a sandwich. There will be 3 layers like this, which are merged into one another to form the actual tympanic membrane. So this is the outer cuticular layer lined with the skin, stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium. This is the inner mucous layer. It is lined by simple columnar epithelium with goblet cell, whereas the middle fibrous layer is made up of connective tissue fibers, which is rich in elastic fibers. So all these 3 are present, sandwiched together to form the tympanic membrane. The outer cuticular layer is developed from the ectoderm, the inner mucous layer developed from the endoderm, whereas the middle fibrous layer is developed from the mesoderm. So this is ectoderm, this is the endoderm mucous layer, and the middle fibrous layer is developed from the mesoderm. That is about the development of tympanic membrane. This tympanic membrane is supplied by anterior tympanic artery and posterior tympanic artery. Now supply tympanic branch of glossopharyngeal nerve and auricular branch of vagus nerve. That is the 9th and 10th cranial nerve. So that is all about the lateral wall of the middle ear. Coming to the medial wall of the middle ear, the medial wall of the middle ear cavity is related to the inner ear, this part of the inner ear. So this part of the inner ear is called as a cochlea. Behind the cochlea will be vestibule, and behind that will be the semicircular canals. So let's consider what is there in the cochlea. We can see the cochlea is like bulging like a snail shell into the medial wall. So it's called as a promontory, especially the basal turn. And we have 2 windows over here. One is oval in shape, the other one is round in shape. So this is called as oval window. The footplate of stapes is like a oval in shape. So the footplate of stapes is attached to the oval window. The stapes will move in and out of the oval window, creating a way within the endolymph. This moves the organ of Corti, the receptor for hearing. That the hair cells within that will get activated. Potassium ion enters the cell and creating a wave of depolarization and nerve impulse. This nerve impulse is carried to the temporal lobe of the brain via the cochlear division of vestibulocochlear nerve. So that is the importance of oval window. When the wave is created within the endolymph, that wave can come back here into the middle ear. That is prevented by secondary tympanic membrane covering the round window. So there will be one membrane covering the round window. It's called the secondary tympanic membrane. So these are the 2 windows: the oval window covered by footplate of stapes and the round window covered by secondary tympanic membrane. In addition to these, we have other features which are there over here. Just see that here. Above this cochlea, there is a horizontal portion of the facial canal carrying the facial nerve within it. Facial nerve will be traveling within this. So this is a facial canal. Also we have the lateral semicircular canal, the bulging of the lateral semicircular canal. And we have one plexus of nerves here. It's called the tympanic plexus. The plexus of nerve will be there over there on the promontory. In addition to facial canal, lateral semicircular canal, there will be a plexus of nerve called as tympanic plexus. These are the other features present within the medial wall of the middle ear cavity. So we finished with the lateral wall, which is made up of tympanic membrane, and the medial wall, which is made up of cochlea of the inner ear. Coming to the roof is formed by a thin plate of bone which is called as tegmen tympani. This is the roof of the tympanic cavity. It is related to the temporal lobe of the brain and separated from the same by the meninges, the dura, arachnoid and pia mater. So any infection of the middle ear can spread to the temporal lobe of the brain from the roof. So the roof is formed mainly by tegmen tympani. Through this, greater petrosal and lesser petrosal nerve also travels, because tegmen tympani belongs to petrous part of temporal bone. So that is the importance of the roof or the superior wall. Moving on to the floor, once we finish the roof, we'll move on to the floor. So this is the floor of the tympanic cavity. Roof is over, it's related to temporal lobe of the brain. Floor is related to the one vein which is coming like this, sigmoid sinus, and becomes one huge vein of the head and neck. It's called the internal jugular vein. So this internal jugular vein is present in the floor of the tympanic cavity. So the floor is also called as a jugular wall. The roof is called as a tegmental wall. So that is the importance. In addition to this, the jugular foramen will be here. So 9th, 10th and 11th cranial nerve is related to the floor. So that is about the floor or the inferior wall. Moving on to the anterior wall. In the anterior wall of the middle ear cavity, we have three canals. Three canals will be there in this. So what is the three canals? We'll see one by one. So this is the anterior wall. We have three canals. One of the canal is for a muscle, and the muscle name is Tensor tympani. It is attached to the handle of malleus. So when the handle of malleus is pulled inwards by the tensor tympani muscle, the tympanic membrane will be tensed. Hence the name tensor tympani. So that is the first canal for the tensor tympani muscle. The second canal is for the Eustisian tube. So what is this tube? Eustisian tube is a tube which connects the nasopharynx to the tympanic cavity. It brings the air into the tympanic cavity. The Eustisian tube brings the air into the tympanic cavity, and it removes the mucus. It drains the mucus from the tympanic cavity. So the first canal is canal for tensor tympani. The next canal is Eustisian tube to ventilate the middle ear and drain the middle ear mucus. The last but not least, this canal is called as a carotid canal for the internal carotid artery. There will be a red color pipe supplying the brain, that is called as internal carotid artery. It will travel through a canal called as carotid canal. That canal is present in the anterior wall of tympanic cavity. To summarize the anterior wall, there will be three canals. First canal is canal for tensor tympani muscle, which attaches to the malleus, pulls the malleus inwards and tenses the tympanic membrane, because tympanic membrane is present within the handle of malleus. The second canal is for the Eustisian tube, a tube which connects the pharynx to the tympanic cavity, also called pharyngotympanic tube, which ventilates the middle ear as well as drains the mucus from the middle ear. The third canal is for the artery, and the artery name is internal carotid artery. This is the artery, internal carotid artery. Therefore, the anterior wall can be called as carotid wall. So that is about the anterior wall. Moving on to the posterior wall. This is a tympanic cavity. We have the posterior wall over here. Okay, I'll just show it in a different way. Yeah, we have the mastoid antrum here. You consider this as the posterior wall, and this will be the anterior wall. This is the superior wall, inferior wall, anterior wall. Let's consider only the posterior wall now. Okay, so we know that in the mastoid cavity there are mastoid air cells or the mastoid antrum. that is ending up in the posterior wall through a small window. It's called the Adytus of the mastoid antrum. So that is present in the posterior wall. Just medial to that, there will be a depression for the incus. So it is called as fossa incudis. Just medial to that, there is a pyramid-like projection. There is a conical projection. It is called the pyramid. Within this pyramid, there is a muscle, and the muscle name is Tepidus, which attaches to the neck of the stapes. And prevents the excessive movement of the stapes whenever a loud sound is heard. And last but not the least, facial canal will be present. One canal for the facial nerve that will be present here, facial canal, and also lateral semicircular canal also is bulging onto this wall. So I'll repeat one more time. The posterior wall of the tympanic cavity is called the mastoid wall because it is mainly related to the mastoid process and the mastoid ear cells. These will open into the middle ear through an opening called as Adytus. Adytus means a window for the mastoid antrum. Next to that, medial to that will be this fossa incudis, a depression for the incus. Medial to that, a conical projection called the pyramid. This is the pyramid. Within this, it's like a mountain projecting from back posterior side. Within the mountain, one volcano you can see, one orange color, that is a muscle actually. The muscle name is Tepidius. It anchors to the neck of the stapes and prevents the excessive movement of the stapes. The other two structures are this canal for the facial nerve, which facial nerve supplies the Stapedius actually, and a lateral semicircular canal, one tube projecting on the lateral aspect. So these are the structures which are present in the posterior wall of the tympanic cavity. To summarize, middle ear cavity is a cubical chamber. This cubical chamber has got 6 walls. They are the anterior wall, the posterior wall, the lateral wall, the medial wall, the roof or the superior wall, the floor or the inferior wall. So we have the anterior wall. It's also called as a carotid wall. It's mainly related to the internal carotid artery, also related to the tensor, tympani, and Eustisian tube. We have the posterior wall. It's also called as a mastoid wall because related mainly to the mastoid antrum. Also related to the pyramid and the fossa incudis and a part of facial canal and lateral semicircular canal. That is about the posterior wall. The roof or the superior wall is called as tegmental wall, related to the temporal lobe of the brain, separated by meninges, dura, arachnoid, and pia mater. The inferior wall is called the jugular wall because it's related to the vein called as internal jugular vein. So the floor or the inferior wall is called as jugular wall, also related to the 9th, 10th, and 11th cranial nerve. The lateral wall is the only wall which is membranous, related to one membrane within the tympanic cavity, so we call it as tympanic membrane. So that is about the lateral wall. The medial wall is related to the cochlea or the bony labyrinth, part of the inner ear, posterior to that vestibule and then the semicircular canals, but mainly is related to the cochlea. So it's a cochlear wall or the labyrinthine wall. This is about the middle ear cavity. Within the middle ear, there are 3 ossicles. The malleus, which appears like a hammer, the incus, which appears like an anvil, and stapes. This is the stapes. These are the 3 ossicles, the malleus, incus, and stapes, from lateral to medial. The malleus, which is like a hammer, the incus, which is like a anvil, and the stapes, which is like a stirrup. Between the incus and malleus there is a joint, incudo-malleal joint. Between the incus and stapes there is a joint, incudo-stapedial joint. Holding on to the malleus there will be one muscle, tensor tympani. Holding on to the stapedius from posterior wall there will be one muscle, Stapedius. Holding on to the stapes, the muscle name is Stapedius. Holding on to the malleus will be tensor tympani. Holding on to the stapes will be Stapedius. In addition to these malleus, incus and stapes and the muscles of the middle ear, there is air in the middle ear. The air in the middle ear comes from this tube called Eustisian tube. Whenever we open our mouth, whenever we yawn, that time the air in the pharynx enters the middle ear. In order to maintain the tympanic membrane in optimal position, we require air. Obviously, air is there in the external auditory canal. Everybody knows this. But air is also there in the tympanic cavity. How does the air enter the tympanic cavity? From the pharynx, nasopharynx, through Eustisian tube. This will maintain the tympanic membrane in optimal position so that it can vibrate at optimum speed, so that the sound waves are traveled from lateral to medial via the ossicles. The ossicles are called so because they are going to oscillate like a pendulum of a clock. Like a pendulum of a clock will oscillate. That's why they are called as ossicles, the malleus, incus and stapes. Thank you for watching and learning from Logic Medico. Kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon. Don't forget to press the thumbs up icon if you like the content. Thank you.